We're glad that you're here and to study with us for a little while concerning service. I really believe that a disciple is one who is called to more service. In Mark chapter 1, verse 17, the Bible talks about Simon and Andrew who were busy in their fishing trade. And Jesus came along, walking on the seashore, and said to these two brothers, "Come, and I'll make you fishers of men." The need to service is evident throughout the Scriptures. In James chapter 1, verse 27, James said that pure religion and undefiled before the Father is this, to visit the fatherless, widows, and their affliction, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. A lot of people think Christianity just involves keeping unspotted from the world. True, that is a great responsibility and one of the many tasks that a Christian has. But he also must realize that pure religion involves visiting, not just a social visit, but a visit to help others. Meeting others' needs is one of the great responsibilities that we have as Christians. Serving is about being available to others. In Matthew chapter 15, beginning at verse 29 through 31 especially, we find Jesus talking to the woman, a Gentile woman, and she was rebuked for coming in and being a part of the ministry of Jesus at this point in time. And Jesus just simply said that you are a Gentile and the service that you render must be wonderful. Matthew chapter 15, 29 to 31, while Jesus was talking to this woman and finding a faith in her that was greater than any faith that he had seen in the country of Israel, he also was busy helping the poor, the needy. Service is not just an event, it is a lifestyle. And saved people serve people. Over the 62 years that I've preached the gospel, I have had great difficulty in getting the people to see that saved people serve people. Saved people serve people. And the story that we emphasize so much in service is Luke chapter 10, verses 30 to 37. It is the Good Samaritan story. Here is a painting of what happened that day when this poor man went down the road and fell among thieves and was left half dead. If you'll look at the artist's conception, you see the two that have already passed by, the Levite and also the priest. The world would expect them to stop and help this poor man, but they did nothing. They passed by on the other side. Now, one of them did go up and look at him, but did no real available service to the poor man. So our title this afternoon is Good Samaritan. I want to give just some points of introduction. Who is there among us who doesn't thrill to hear the story of the Good Samaritan? It was probably one of the very first stories that you heard as a child. It's a kind of story that never grows old. And of course, we will note the background of the Good Samaritan. The next slide talks about the Good Samaritan. The parable itself is a conversation. It's between Jesus and the lawyer. The lawyer is not what we think of as lawyers today, legal representatives of the law, but he was a person that really knew the Old Testament. He knew the Scriptures. And so this particular lawyer stood up tempting Jesus, saying, "Master, what shall I do to inherit life?" And he said unto him, "What is written in the law? How readest thou?" And he answered and said, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy strength, with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. And he said unto him, Thou hast answered right, this do, and thou shalt live. He, being willing to justify himself, said unto Jesus, Who is my neighbor? And Jesus answered and said, A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and fell among thieves, which stripped him of his raiment, and wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. And by chance there came a certain priest that way, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise a Levite, when he was at the place, came and looked on him, and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, now the word good is not used in Scripture. We've added that, and it is well deserved. A certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him, and went to him, and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And on the morrow, when he departed, he took out 2 pence, and gave them to the host, and said unto him, Take care of him, and whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee. Which now of these 3 thinkest thou was neighbor unto him that fell among the thieves? And he said, He that showed mercy on him. Then Jesus said, Go and do thou likewise. So here was a man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. I am told by our guide a few years ago, as we looked at the old Jericho-Jerusalem road, that you could literally get on a bicycle, and if you were in Jerusalem, you could push off, and with little pedaling, you could ride all the way the 36 miles down the mountain without much pedaling to Jericho. Well, this man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, going down to Jericho, is a very hilly road bed that's in between mountains and has excellent places to hide for thieves and robbers. And so this man, who has every right to travel this road in safety, he is beaten and left half dead. 2 passed by, doing nothing to help the poor injured man, the Levite and the priest. And as we mentioned a moment ago, they were expected to help, but they passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, under normal circumstances, there would be no relationship between this man, if the one that's robbed and beaten is a Jew, and a Samaritan. But circumstances are different. He's injured. He needs help. And so he's willing to accept the help of a Samaritan. A Samaritan comes by and shows compassion. There are 5 C's, words that begin with the letter C, that we see in this particular story. First of all, there is consciousness. All 3 of the men, the Samaritan as well as the Levite and the priest, see him. They saw him in the ditch, bleeding, needing help, needing someone to assist. Compassion. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him. The religious world needs to show compassion. But more than that, the church of the Lord must show compassion. There was contact. That Samaritan went to him. Luke chapter 10, verse 34. And then there was care. He went there to bandage up his wounds. Luke chapter 10, verse 35, and to pour in wine and oil, the medicines of the day. There was cost involved. The next day, here was a man that was just as busy as the other two, that wanted to get home just as much as the other two did. He spent the night taking care of this person. But the next day, he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. And he promised, if there's more, you spend more in caring for this man, getting him well again, you just mark it on my bill, and I will repay you. There are 3 attitudes toward life that are seen in this story. First of all, there is the attitude of beating down life. That's the robber's attitude. Then there is the priest and the Levite who pass life by. Then there is the attitude of the Good Samaritan. Lift life up. And so the 3 attitudes, beat life down, pass life by, or lift life up. Which are we doing? As Christians, we must be lifting life up. The Good Samaritan is our model. He is our model to help if we notice who he helped. He is our model because he makes no excuses. He is our model because he took care of him from the beginning to the end. You know, sometimes we have a sick person in our congregation and we start out a week or so and everybody wants to sit up with him or help him in some way. But as the weeks drag on, it gets a little more difficulty to get volunteers to help. Here was the Samaritan, willing to help, to take care of him from the beginning to the end. He's our model because he carries out his compassion in a business-like fashion. He's our model because his good was done with no reward in sight. There are 5 attitudes toward the hurt traveler that we ought to emphasize. To the religious lawyer, he's a problem to discuss. To the thieves, he is a victim to exploit. What can we get out of him? To the priest and to the Levite, this man that has been beaten is a nuisance to avoid. Every man must take care for himself. But to the Samaritan, his neighbor, that's his attitude toward this poor man. Now, why did the Lord choose the Samaritan as a representative for all time? There used to be a hospital in Montgomery, Alabama, called the Good Samaritan Hospital. It was a place where people felt free to go. Long before there was the backing of the government to the care units of the hospital, people could go to the Good Samaritan Hospital in Montgomery, and no one was ever turned away. Why did Jesus choose this man to illustrate the part of the good guy? The Samaritans were hated and despised by the Jews. The lawyer would not even say the name Samaritan. Jesus wanted to show in being a neighbor that we're not just limited by time or space or even by character. The next slide is an artist's conception of what I really believe compassion is all about. There were no rubber gloves. There was no way of avoiding probably really being in contact with this injured man. But he was not afraid. He showed compassion. What is the cost of compassion even in our day and time? Sometimes it's a willingness to cross social barriers. there was ever a social barrier that was big, it's between the Samaritans and the Jews. But this particular Samaritan was ready to help his enemy. A willingness to take risk. How did he know that this was a setup? That they injured this man, left him in the ditch, and they were hiding somewhere in a cave nearby, ready to pounce upon anyone that would stop and help. Well, there's a willingness to set aside a busy schedule. The priest and the Levite were coming from Jerusalem. They'd probably been in the worship service at the temple. They had been there for a number of weeks, and they were wanting to get home to see their children, to see their wife, to see their family. They had a busy schedule. And so to help another person would delay their getting home. They passed by on the other side. Do you suppose that the Samaritan also had some things he needed to do? You know, we can always say, oh, I've got to study, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. The preacher calls upon us to take someone to the hospital, to care for someone, to make sure that they have meals. They just don't realize how busy I am. There was a willingness to set aside busy schedules. There was a willingness to make sacrifice. He alone opened his own billfold and, as it were, took out money to pay the innkeeper, the hospital of the day, to take care of him. And if there was more expenses when he returned, he would pay. What are some lessons that we learn from the Good Samaritan? One of the first is a neighbor is one in need who we can help. Usually we think of a neighbor as one that lives next door to us. He is a person that has the same lifestyle we do. He goes to the same congregation that we go. A neighbor is one in need whom we can help. Some years ago, I was in a meeting, a little congregation down south of Montgomery. The preacher lived in Montgomery, and I lived in Montgomery. It was 36 miles down to the church building. He said, Brother Sides, I'll drive Monday night, you drive Tuesday night, and so on, and we'll cut down on the gas bill. Peachtree, Alabama. You probably have never been to Peachtree, Alabama. The only real employee in Peachtree is the big wholesaler. In Jasper, Alabama, I saw just recently one of their big trucks delivering food stocks to one of our grocery stores. Peachtree, Alabama has this big warehouse, but it has this small congregation. Well, the preacher, as we were driving along Highway 31 south, there was a white flag on the car. The hood was up. And he said, we got to stop and help. Well, when we stopped and helped, we only had maybe 15, 20 more minutes before the service began. Flat tire. So two preachers get out there and change the tire for this lady, and she tries to pay, and we say no. The next day, it was my time to drive, and lo and behold, somewhere down pretty close to where we helped the person the day before, another person had a flat tire. I said, we're going to stop and help. The preacher was very much ready to do so as well. The third time we had a flat tire situation, we helped, stopped, and we barely got there in all three of the services. One time I saw my white shirt was so dirty for changing the tire. But I hope and trust that if I ever am broke down, that the preacher for the church at Peachtree, Alabama, is following close behind because he's going to stop and help. Somebody says, you were in a gospel meeting. They couldn't start without the preacher. They wouldn't start without the person filling the pulpit. Oh, yes, they did one night. They'd already started by the time we got there. The point is, are we good Samaritans? Somebody says, I just don't believe I could do that today in our life and time. Well, a neighbor is one in need whom we can help. You can't separate neighborliness from pure religion. Let me quote James 1, verse 27. Pure religion and undefiled before the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. Compassion has cost. Remember, kindness is legs of mercy, eyes of understanding, heart of love, and hands of caring. The great commandment is to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And the second is likened unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. When the lawyer answered like Jesus wanted him to answer, Jesus said to this lawyer, go and do likewise. Meeting our needs is helping others. John chapter 13, verse 17. God has designed us to serve, even though it doesn't seem natural. In Mark chapter 10, verses 35 through 45, Jesus said this, you want to be great, you be your minister. There were some who came and said, now, my boys have served you, Jesus, all of their lives. When you come into your kingdom, let one sit on the right hand and the other on the left hand. Jesus said, are they ready to be baptized of the baptism that I'm about to be baptized of? And he that would be greatest among you, let him be your minister. You know why mother is such an important person? Especially at lunchtime, dinner time. She's the last one to sit down and fill her plate with the delicious food that she has cooked. What does mother do? She's round the table waiting on everybody, serving one another. And then when everybody else is served, she sits down to eat. That's what your mother does at your house. She sees that all of you are fed, prepared before she. I think a Christian is one who puts others first. Jesus wants service that doesn't have to be noticed. When Jesus came into the judgment, he was not asking in Matthew chapter 25, when were you baptized? As important as baptism is. He didn't ask that day of judgment in Matthew 25, how many church services did you attend? Were you faithful in church attendance? As important as that is, he was asking questions like this. I was a hunger, and you gave me meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. And they said, when did we see you, Lord, like that? Then Jesus said, inasmuch as you did it not to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it not unto me. When I preached for the Blackwater, Macedonia congregation a few years ago, of course, as they do, every Sunday afternoon they have visitation at one of the nursing homes. There was a man, the nursing home he's since passed, but in the nursing home then, this man had a family, but they didn't come to see him. They had really forgotten him. And I encouraged one young man from Blackwater, Macedonia, to help us in our nursing home visitation on Sunday afternoon. He said, Brother Sides, I just can't do that. I just can't stand the smell. I just cannot be around older people. You know, they have a scent of their own, and it just gets me. I said, well, go with us just this Sunday afternoon, and let's see. And I encouraged him to do. And even Sunday morning, he said, I just can't go. But by the time the service was over, and I'd asked him already 4 times to go with us, because I thought he was going to be such a good helper in that work. He said, I'll go just for you, just this time. And on that first visit, he went into a room, and it was this room of this old fellow. And he was nervous. He sat over in the chair beside the bed and asked about his children. He said, I have 2, and they don't ever come. Who washes your clothes? Well, somebody does every once in a while. Well, it made such an impression on him that he went back the next day, the next Sunday, and the next Sunday, and the next Sunday. He never got anywhere further than that particular room each time he visited the nursing home. The old fellow got to calling him Jesus, my Jesus. The old fellow didn't know his name, really, I didn't guess. Just simply referred to him as my Jesus. One Sunday afternoon, he was sick with cold, and he said, Brother Sides, I don't believe I need to go. And I said, no, not today. When I went into the room, the old fellow said, where's my Jesus? Where's my Jesus? When was the last time that somebody spoke of you as Jesus Christ? That's really whom we are to represent to the world. That's the kind of person that we're to exemplify for our neighbors and friends. The man prayed that Jesus would come to see him. A little boy came with rags and no shoes. He turned him away. Same day, there was a poor widow that knocked on his door. He turned her away. And in the dream, he said, Lord, I thought you were coming to see me. He said, I came twice, and you turned me away. Inasmuch as you did it not unto the least of these, my brethren, you did it not unto me. Meeting our needs involves helping others with their needs. We've never been able to get this over to a lot of people, that pure religion, sure, there is to avoid being spotted up with the world, but it is to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. The invitation of Jesus is clearly seen. And I've said this so many times, that this is the last slide that my son helped me before his untimely death. And this slide means a lot to me, because Lee helped me make it, but it means a lot because this is what Jesus says. And the Spirit and the bride say, come, and let him that heareth say, come, and let him that is athirst come, and whosoever will, let him take the water of life freely. That's the invitation that Jesus gives. Notice that it's emphasized in the word come. God's simple plan of salvation involves, here in the word, Romans 10, verse 17, faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. Believe in Mark chapter 16, verse 16, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. It involves repenting of one's sins, Luke 13:3. I tell you, nay, except you repent, ye shall all likewise perish. Then we're to confess that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Romans 10, verse 10, for with the heart man believeth unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. Then we're to be baptized into Christ. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 21. I read in an article, Christian Chronicles, this past week, where the survey was made among 5,383 congregations. Christian Chronicle, one of our newspapers, Christian newspapers. 56% of the congregations never heard the gospel plan of salvation anymore. That's not true with this church. Brother David emphasizes every time he speaks and closes his sermon. It's so important that we tell people what to do. That's what we've done today. Service is important. Obedience to the commands of Christ are important as well. Have you become a Christian? Are you a disciple? Are you called to something greater and better to help somebody? When was the last time that someone said, "Where's my Jesus? Where is he? I want to see him"? Are we living pure and undefiled religion? If not, why not? Make it right. All together we stand and sing.